The United States Air Force operates as a highly calibrated mechanical system.
Right. Entirely mechanical.
I mean, you look at the physical assets. The aircraft are maintained to exact tolerances. The munitions are stored at precise temperatures.
And the communication networks are secured with, cryptographic precision.
Exactly. Yet the central processing unit of this entire apparatus, the human operator, remains inherently volatile.
Highly volatile.
Today, we examine the diagnostic manuals designed to stabilize and optimize that human variable. Welcome to the Blue Suit Files.
We are conducting a precise operational analysis of the source material that dictates human asset management within this specific architecture.
Right. We're dissecting Chapter 14 of Air Force Handbook 1, titled Developing Others.
And we are cross-referencing this text directly with the Airman Development and Testing Chart, or, the ADTC.
But our objective is singular here. We are scanning the ADTC to isolate the mandated comprehension levels required for a technical sergeant.
The designated mid-level operator of this organization.
Precisely. And we need to be clear for you, the listener, we are not evaluating leadership suggestions or philosophical guidelines.
No, we are analyzing regulatory programming. The ADTC explicitly codes the required cognitive processing power for each rank in the system.
And we must understand exactly what is demanded of this specific operator.
Well, the architecture of this testing system is rigid. It's unforgiving. It utilizes a comprehension scale ranging from level A to level D.
Right, where level A is just remembering.
Exactly, mere retrieval of facts from a database.
Yeah.
And level D is analyzing, which involves the complete dissection of complex organizational structures.
But for the material covering human development, the technical sergeant is mandated to operate at level B and, crucially, level C.
We need to define those parameters clinically. Section 14A on teamwork, Section 14B on develops people, and 14D on leadership all mandate level B comprehension.
And the ADTC defines level B as understanding. So this requires the operator to construct meaning from the text, interpret the regulations, and explain the underlying mechanisms of the system to others.
Right. It is theoretical mastery. You have to know the why.
However, Section 14C, which covers the service mindset, requires a systemic escalation.
It does. For this specific protocol, the system demands level C comprehension. Level C is applying.
Meaning physical execution.
Exactly. It dictates that the operator must carry out and execute these procedures in real-world, high-stakes situations. This is where the theoretical framework is tested against reality.
So rote memorization is flagged as insufficient.
Completely insufficient. A conceptual understanding of leadership is insufficient. You're expected to extract the operational code from the handbook and physically execute it to manage, correct, and optimize human assets under stress.
And this establishes the exact utility for you. If you operate within this hierarchy, failing to transition your processing from level B to level C means you possess the blueprint but lack the physical capacity to build the machine.
You become nothing more than a repository of unapplied data.
Right. And to deploy this code effectively, you must first understand the baseline operational environment where the execution takes place.
Which is the team.
Exactly. We initiate our analysis with Section 14A. The text defines this team environment using the specific term dynamic.
And in civilian corporate environments, this word has been degraded into meaningless jargon. It's often used to describe anything vaguely energetic.
Yeah, just a buzzword.
Right. But the Air Force Handbook reclaims the word with clinical accuracy. It utilizes dynamic to describe elements of a process or system that are subject to constant change, activity, or progress.
Most critically, the text defines it as a force that stimulates change.
Exactly. Therefore, a military team is not a static object. It is a thermodynamic system.
It generates heat, it experiences friction, and it requires constant calibration to maintain forward momentum.
And to manage this thermodynamic system, the text identifies a foundational triad of variables: trust, communication, and cooperation.
We must strip away the emotional connotations of these words. These are the load-bearing pillars of the unit's operational architecture.
We must analyze trust as the core variable of this triad. The text explicitly asserts that trust is the central processor of all healthy team interaction.
Without it, the subsequent variables communication and cooperation, they simply cannot initialize.
They can't. To illustrate the fragility of this variable, the text quotes Suzanne Zoglio from her work, Teams at Work.
And the quote is highly specific.
Very. It reads, "Nothing reduces trust in a group faster than members saying one thing within the group and something else outside the group."
I want to examine the mechanics of that quote. Why is that specific behavior saying one thing inside and another outside identified as the ultimate destructive force?
Because it describes a critical data corruption error.
Exactly. If an operator transmits one set of data to the internal unit network and a contradictory set of data to external commands, the system detects a terminal inconsistency.
The internal network instantly recognizes that the operator is generating false readouts to manipulate the environment.
Trust is zeroed out immediately, and the unit stops accepting commands from that node.
Precisely. The system isolates the compromised node. So how does the technical sergeant, acting as the primary system operator, prevent this corruption and maintain the trust metric?
Well, the text prescribes highly specific mechanical actions. The leader is required to set the correct operational tone,
They must provide their subordinates with complete access to necessary data.
which means the system demands a total rejection of information hoarding.
Right. Furthermore, the operator is mandated to actively identify and dismantle cliques.
Let us define a clique in this context. A clique is an unauthorized subnetwork.
It's a parasitic routine that siphons resources, communication bandwidth, and operational data away from the primary mission to serve a localized group.
When the text mandates the destruction of divisions, it is instructing the technical sergeant to format the hard drive and force all components back onto the primary network.
Because once the primary network is secure, once trust is established, communication acts as the data packet transfer protocol.
And the text is unambiguous here. Teams that do not allow honest, open sharing quickly lose their operational effectiveness.
When individual members withhold vital information, the system inevitably experiences confusion, friction, and ultimately task failure.
And when leaders themselves hold on to information, they create an inaccurate, incomplete, or totally false picture of the expected outcome.
They blind their own operators.
Which brings us to the final pillar, cooperation.
Right. The text notes that cooperation yields synergistic results and fundamentally reduces the exerted effort required to reach an outcome.
It is entirely a matter of energy efficiency. Two components working in alignment draw less power to achieve the same rotational speed.
However, the text identifies a specific behavioral flaw that destroys this efficiency. It labels this behavioral anomaly all-starring.
The machinery analogy applies perfectly here. All-starring occurs when a single gear decides to spin out of sync with the transmission,
Attempting to draw maximum power and external attention entirely to itself, regardless of the damage it causes to the surrounding mechanisms.
And the text identifies this behavior not as mere arrogance, but as a symptom of an active power struggle.
The anomalous gear is attempting to replace the primary drive shaft.
So the mandated level B response from the technical surgeon is critical here.
Right. And the response is not emotional counseling. It is not an appeal to the gear's sense of fairness.
It is mechanical recalibration. The text prescribes the exact fix. The leader must explicitly re-emphasize each team member's specific roles and responsibilities.
You eliminate the power struggle by strictly defining and enforcing the operational boundaries of the anomalous unit.
You mathematically box them in, forcing the gear back into alignment with the system's requirements.
Understanding this triad prepares the operator to monitor the chronological progression of the unit. A team is not assembled fully optimized.
Right. The text outlines 4 typical, normal, and inevitable stages of team dynamics: forming, storming, norming, and performing.
Forming is the initial assembly phase. It is characterized by high uncertainty.
Individuals are transitioning from autonomous units to integrated components.
During this phase, they cautiously test the tolerances of the system. They probe the boundaries of acceptable group behavior, and the leader's guidance is constantly audited for consistency.
And then storming immediately follows. Here we must acknowledge a clinical vagueness in the text that requires strict interpretation.
The text states that conflict during this phase is inevitable. It explicitly notes that members will tend to resist the influence of the team and will actively rebel against accomplishing the assigned task.
I want to push back on the framing of that section. The text treats rebellion not as a possibility, but as a mathematical certainty.
Yes.
It states personnel will rebel, they will argue, they will attempt to rely solely on their individual, localized experience to avoid the friction of collaboration. Why does the military apparatus accept open rebellion as a standardized phase of team building?
Because it understands the physics of integration.
Right.
The technical sergeant must expect this friction, because it is the unavoidable heat generated when separate components are forced to grind against one another to find their seating.
It is a stress test of the unit's newly formed communication and trust protocols.
Exactly. And if the unit survives the stress test, it transitions into norming. In the norming stage, the tech state's members reconcile their competing loyalties. They accept the structural ground rules.
The emotional friction is reduced to manageable operational temperatures.
Finally, the system achieves performing. The team develops internal diagnostic proficiency.
It identifies its own errors and solves them without escalating the issue.
It implements mechanical changes fluidly. It becomes an effective, cohesive, and highly productive machine.
But the transition from the destructive storming phase to the optimized performing phase is not passive.
No. To move the team across that threshold, the operator must actively utilize conflict management.
The text defines conflict coldly as an extended struggle or disagreement, and it categorizes the origin points of conflict into three distinct factors: communication, structural, and personal behavior.
The communication factor requires deep analysis because it is frequently misdiagnosed by operators.
The text clarifies that the crux of communication failure is rarely a lack of data.
Right. The problem is miscommunication, the transmission of corrupted or poorly encoded data.
Even over-communication, if the data is misinterpreted, inaccurate, or incomplete, overwhelms the system's processing capacity and leads directly to unit frustration.
Structural factors, conversely, are entirely mechanical and often outside the direct control of the individual components.
The text points out that the larger the organization, the higher the mathematical probability of conflict. It is a simple issue of scaling complexity.
Furthermore, competition for scarce resources, whether that resource is funding, equipment, or personnel, forces internal units to posture against one another defensively.
Then you have personal behavior factors. These involve individual differences in goals, values, and processing methods.
The text provides a precise operational directive for the technical sergeant here. You must align the individual's personal needs and values with the overall United States Air Force mission.
Addressing these behavioral anomalies through a realistic, objective perspective rather than an emotional one drastically reduces system arguments.
When conflict inevitably occurs across any of these three factors, the system requires immediate calibration. To achieve this, the text deploys a matrix designed by Dr. Kenneth Thomas.
This matrix evaluates conflict management styles based on two intercepting axes: the degree of assertiveness deployed by the leader and the degree of cooperativeness extended to the subordinate.
The system prescribes 5 distinct operational styles based on these coordinates.
We must dissect each style and its systemic fallout. The first protocol is competing, occasionally labeled forcing.
This quadrant requires high assertiveness and low cooperativeness.
This is the raw application of formal authority. It is the utilization of rank, threats, or institutional power to entirely overwhelm an opponent's position.
It is a blunt instrument designed for immediate compliance.
Let us apply this to a scenario. 2 maintenance crews are deadlocked over access to a critical diagnostic tool, delaying a launch sequence.
The technical sergeant deploys the competing style. They step in, pull rank, assign the tool to Crew A, and order Crew B to stand down.
The immediate mechanical result is achieved. The tool is utilized.
But the long-term systemic fallout is that Crew B's cooperativeness metric drops, and resentment begins to pool in the system. The competing style is efficient, but it damages the components.
The exact opposite approach is accommodating. This represents low assertiveness and high cooperativeness.
It is the physical act of yielding. The operator completely gives in to the desires or demands of the other party to eliminate the friction.
Applying this to the same scenario, the technical sergeant listens to Crew B's aggressive demand for the tool and simply yields to avoid an argument, even if Crew A had priority.
The friction is instantly neutralized, but the leader has actively rewarded aggressive behavior and established a precedent that the system's rules are subordinate to whoever complains the loudest.
Accommodating stabilizes the immediate moment but corrupts the long-term operational standards.
This brings us to the optimal yet most resource-intensive protocol: collaborating. High assertiveness, high cooperativeness.
The operational goal is to satisfy the fundamental concerns of both sides through rigorous, honest data exchange. It seeks a definitive, structurally sound win position for all involved units.
Collaborating requires total trust and an open network to function.
Right, so the technical sergeant sits both crews down, asserts that the launch sequence cannot be delayed, that's the high assertiveness, but actively works with both teams to discover a staggered diagnostic schedule that allows both crews to complete their tasks.
That's the high cooperativeness. This method permanently solves the structural flaw, but it consumes a massive amount of the leader's time and processing power.
The fourth protocol is avoiding. Low assertiveness, low cooperativeness. This is a neutral position.
The leader observes the conflict, unplugs themselves from the situation, and steps away from the mechanism entirely.
We will analyze the catastrophic fallout of this specific protocol later in the consequence phase, as the text strictly warns against it.
The final protocol is compromising. This sits dead center on the matrix. Moderate assertiveness, moderate cooperativeness.
Both parties are forced to change their parameters, adjust their expectations, or surrender a resource to partially satisfy their programming.
Compromise is often heralded as the ultimate goal in civilian dispute resolution. However, in this system, the text presents it merely as an operational necessity when resources are strained.
The technical sergeant must analyze the immediate situation, evaluate the operational stakes, and read the personnel involved to select the precise mathematical protocol from this matrix.
Proper conflict management stabilizes the thermodynamic system. It prevents the engine from tearing itself apart.
But mere stabilization is not the objective of the United States Air Force. The objective is peak optimization.
To optimize the team, the technical sergeant must engineer the internal development of the individual components.
This transitions our operational analysis out of teamwork and directly into Section 14B and 14D, engineering the human asset.
The fundamental architectural concept introduced here is the absolute distinction between leadership and management.
The text utilizes a framework developed by Warren G. Bennis to enforce the separation. The distinction is not semantic, it is structural.
We begin with management. Management is entirely focused on administration, maintenance, and control.
Managers ensure that physical resources are available and effectively distributed.
They organize projects, staff the required positions, and devise mechanical systems to monitor the implementation of tasks.
The text summarizes this with a precise quote. Management is getting people to do what needs to be done.
I have to challenge this separation because it feels artificial. In a high-tempo military operation, the technical sergeant is doing both simultaneously.
Right, they are managing the shift schedule while leading the personnel. Why does the text demand such a strict conceptual firewall between the two?
Because they utilize entirely different fuel sources. Management utilizes external pressure rules, schedules, and rank.
Leadership hacks the internal operating system.
Exactly. Bennis labels the behavioral characteristics of leaders as motivating, developing, and inspiring. Leaders must align the individual's personal needs, wants, and aspirations with the organizational task.
The defining quote concludes, leadership is getting people to want to do what needs to be done.
Management applies force from the outside. Leadership ignites propulsion from the inside.
To make a subordinate intrinsically want to execute a difficult or dangerous task, the leader must map the subordinate's internal motivation.
To provide this map, the text imports Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs and overlays it directly onto the military environment.
The pyramid consists of 5 sequential layers: physiological, safety, belongingness, esteem, and self-actualization.
We must critically examine how an organization designed for warfare interacts with the base layers of this pyramid.
The text is incredibly rigid regarding the operational parameters. It states explicitly, if you are hungry or thirsty, you will not be able to focus on building relationships.
But more critically, it maps this to the modern operational environment. It states that individuals who are concerned about their fundamental job security, their safety, will not be able to focus on striving for higher achievement.
The logic here is cold, linear, and undeniable. The text warns that if an airman's base layer is unstable, their processing capacity is hard-capped. They will not reach their full potential.
The technical sergeant cannot extract peak performance, or what Maslow calls self-actualization, from a unit that is constantly scanning the environment for threats to its livelihood, safety, or career progression.
If a leader demands high-level innovation from an airman who doesn't know what shift they are working tomorrow, the leader is deploying a faulty algorithm. The base layers must be structurally secured first.
Securing those base layers, and subsequently directing the unit toward the mission, requires the physical application of power.
Section 14D catalogs the 5 specific points of power, as defined by Ken Blanchard.
A leader is mandated to understand these power sources to reduce their dependency on external systems and increase their operational initiative.
Let us audit these 5 sources. Source 1 is position power.
This is the inherent mechanical authority of the rank on the uniform or the title on the desk.
It is the power to manage people or command resources simply because the organizational flowchart dictates it. It requires zero personal investment from the leader.
Source 2 is task power. This power is generated by demonstrating high-level proficiency at a specific process, procedure, or machine.
It is the power of being the single necessary component to complete a critical operation. If you are the only operator who understands how to calibrate a specific radar array, you possess massive task power regardless of your rank.
Source 3 is personal power. This is generated entirely by character attributes.
It is the strength of character, internal passion, advanced interpersonal skills, and the raw ability to persuade others. It is the magnetic force of the individual's personal programming.
Source 4 is relationship power. Here, we encounter a severe instance of systemic vagueness that demands clinical analysis.
The text states that this power is derived from association, friendship, or familiarity with others. It explicitly lists reciprocity as a mechanism, which it clearly defines as trading favors.
This is a glaring contradiction in the manual's code. Immediately after acknowledging reciprocity and favor trading as a legitimate source of power, the text issues a stark warning.
Perceived favoritism can have negative effects in the organization.
This system is openly acknowledging that human networking and the trading of favors generate highly measurable, effective power. Yet, it simultaneously warns the operator of the toxic fallout of this exact behavior.
The text offers no safe harbor. The technical sergeant is expected to utilize the network of favors without ever triggering the system's alarms for favoritism. They must navigate this contradiction perfectly.
Source 5 is knowledge power. This is recognized expertise, physically evidenced by degrees, technical certifications, or specialized training.
Unlike position power, knowledge power is portable. It is transferable across different jobs and organizations. It is the possession and control of highly specialized data.
Understanding Maslow's architecture and accurately identifying the 5 points of power completely satisfies the level B requirement of understanding. You can explain the machine.
But as we established in the introduction, the system demands an escalation. We now shift our analysis to Section 14C, the service mindset.
This section demands level C comprehension. It is no longer theoretical. The operator must physically execute these theories in high-stakes, real-world scenarios.
Scenario 1 involves the execution of the mentoring protocol. The text dictates that leaders possess an inherent, non-negotiable obligation to mentor future leaders.
To execute this safely and effectively, the system provides a rigid 9-step algorithm spelled out as the acronym MENTORING.
We will dissect this algorithm letter by letter, analyzing the mechanical action required for each step. The first letter, M, stands for model.
The mentor must serve as a flawless operational role model. The text assumes that the protege is actively and continuously observing the mentor's reactions to environmental stimuli.
Actions supersede verbal instructions. If the mentor's actions contradict their directives, the protocol fails at step 1.
E is for empathize. The text demands the deployment of genuine compassion.
This is not a suggestion for emotional softness. It is a required networking protocol.
Mentors must deliberately recall their own past inexperienced state to cultivate a psychological bond. This bond is necessary to foster mutual commitment to the intense training regimen.
N is for nurture. The text likens this to a farmer tending a field. In a high-stress military environment, this feels counterintuitive. I must question this requirement. How does a technical sergeant balance the demand for instant, flawless compliance with the requirement to nurture a subordinate?
By recognizing that nurturing is a long-term investment strategy. The system requires an investment of time, extreme patience, and focused effort to allow the protege the processing time necessary to internalize new data.
Immediate compliance is for emergencies. Nurturing is for building capacity. If the leader only demands immediate compliance, they build robots, not future leaders.
The next letter, T, stands for teach. The text does not leave teaching to intuition. It outlines a strict 5-step subroutine.
You must organize the material into manageable data units. You must correct errors immediately upon detection. You must continuously review previous material. You must include physical, practical exercises.
And you must evaluate their progress with highly detailed, actionable feedback.
O is for organize. The mentor must possess the exact endpoint coordinates from the very beginning. Random, casual interaction is explicitly not mentoring.
The protocol requires a logical, sequential, and highly structured plan aimed at a precisely defined target.
R is for respond. The system requires active data gathering. The mentor must execute active listening and provide timely responses.
They must scan for nonverbal behaviors and subtle behavioral cues, proactively anticipating the needs, structural limits, and upcoming problems of the protege before the protege even recognizes them.
IEs is for inspire. As we discussed with Bennis's framework, the text states this characteristic is the definitive separator between leaders and managers.
It is the application of personal power to profoundly impact proteges, encouraging them to overwrite their own limitations and transform into an improved iteration of themselves.
IN is for network. The mentor must physically connect the protege with other nodes in the organizational structure.
This provides the protege with increased guidance, access to broader resources, and operational opportunities outside the mentor's direct control.
Finally, G is for goal set. This is where the level C application is most rigidly and clinically defined. The system outright rejects vague aspirations.
Do your best as an invalid input. The system requires SMART goals.
The parameters for a compliant SMART goal are exact, specific. The goal must have a singular, unambiguous focus.
Measurable. There must be a mathematical metric to track progress.
Achievable. The goal must be physically and logically possible within the system's constraints.
Realistic. The goal must align with the resources currently available.
Time-bound. The goal must have a definitive expiration date for completion. If a goal lacks even one of these 5 metrics, it is non-compliant and the mentoring protocol is voided.
Scenario 2 introduces the counseling matrix. Counseling is defined as the direct, formal intervention by the leader into the airman's operational path.
The trigger for this intervention is governed by a strict temporal requirement.
The text states, the key to successful counseling is to conduct the counseling as close to the event as possible.
We must analyze the logic of this timing. Delay introduces memory corruption. As time passes, both the leader and the subordinate reconstruct the event through subjective filters.
The objective data degrades. The system demands immediate intervention to ensure the feedback is applied to the raw, uncorrupted event.
Once initiated, the operator must choose from 3 distinct counseling approaches based on situational variables and the subordinate's processing capacity. The first approach is non-directive.
The text identifies the non-directive approach as the preferred method for the majority of sessions. In this protocol, the leader primarily listens.
They deliberately refrain from providing solutions, rendering opinions, or issuing immediate fixes.
Instead, they force the airman to explore the situation, clarify the data points, and develop their own plan of action that aligns with organizational goals.
The mechanical advantage of the non-directive approach is that it forces the internal processing system of the airman to engage. It builds problem-solving capacity and enforces personal responsibility.
The severe structural disadvantage is that it is highly time-consuming and requires immense restraint and skill from the counselor to avoid simply handing over the answer.
The second approach is directive. I look at this and assume it is the most utilized method because of the operational tempo.
It is utilized when time is critically short, the solution is glaringly obvious, or the airman lacks the processing capability to solve the problem safely. The leader simply dictates the exact course of action. Do X to achieve Y.
Your assumption is correct regarding its efficiency, but the text explicitly warns against its overuse. The directive approach is the fastest method to correct a simple mechanical error.
However, the text explicitly lists its catastrophic disadvantage. It frequently treats the superficial symptoms, not the root structural problems.
Furthermore, it conditions the airmen to rely entirely on external commands rather than developing their own internal processing power. If you constantly use directive counseling, your team's autonomous capability drops to 0.
The third approach is combined. This is a blended articulation of the previous 2.
The leader offers multiple options and assists in analyzing the potential fallout of those solutions, but ultimately steps back and encourages the airmen to decide which solution is mathematically best.
Regardless of which approach is selected, the physical execution of the counseling session must follow a strict 4-step sequence. Step 1. State the purpose clearly and unambiguously.
Step 2. Discuss the issues using objective data, not emotional assessments.
Step 3. Develop a concrete plan of action.
Step 4. Record the plan. Documentation is mandatory for system tracking. Without a record, the intervention mathematically did not occur.
Scenario 3 demands the implementation of vision. Section 14C defines vision not as a mystical foresight, but as a practical tool. helping people believe they can accomplish goals in anticipation of a better future.
The text provides a historical example to illustrate this technology. President John F. Kennedy's 1961 announcement of the intention to put a man on the moon within the decade.
The text demands we analyze this not as a historical footnote, but as a mechanical application of leadership technology.
It was an application of what the text calls inspirational motivation. By standard metrics of the era, the task was categorized as statistically impossible.
Kennedy utilized a dramatic, highly publicized announcement to intentionally infect the national system with inspiration.
He altered the operational parameters of the entire organizational structure, forcing it to achieve the impossible by reprogramming the collective objective.
The manual dictates that leaders at the technical sergeant level must perform the exact same function, translating macrovisions into microtasks appropriate for their specific units.
They must anticipate external influences and internal trends that will affect their unit's vision over the next month or year.
The vision must be perfectly logical, deductive, and plausible, yet unbounded enough to encourage aggressive initiative from the subordinates.
When the technical sergeant successfully applies these level C protocols, when they accurately diagnose the thermodynamics of the team, engineer the individual's motivation, execute the rigid mentoring protocol, and enforce a localized vision, the unit functions at peak mechanical efficiency.
But our analysis must now shift to the pathology of the system. What happens when the operator misdiagnoses the code?
What happens when they apply the wrong conflict algorithm?
What happens when they simply abandon their post?
We enter the analysis of consequence. The tone of our review must reflect the stark clinical reality of organizational failure.
We are no longer discussing theoretical academic concepts. We are tracking the exact mechanisms that lead to the degradation of military readiness.
This is not about hurt feelings or office politics. This is about structural compromise in an organization designed for warfare.
We begin with failure mode 1, laissez-faire leadership. To understand this, we turn to the full-range leadership development model, the FRLD.
Laissez-faire is categorized as the absolute lowest tier of this model. It is defined as the complete absence of leadership. It is systemic abandonment.
The text describes laissez-faire leaders with brutal clarity. These operators view the development and needs of their subordinates as someone else's concern.
They completely abandon their designated responsibilities. They are characterized by profound indifference. They hesitate to make any decisions, and they are frequently physically absent from the workspace.
The documented consequence of this abandonment is severe and immediate. The text states definitively that this behavior negatively affects relationships with peers and subordinates.
When the operator unplugs themselves from the control panel, the entire system stalls.
Without continuous input and calibration, the unit rapidly degrades from a functional machine into chaotic, localized subsystems fighting for survival.
Failure mode 2 is misapplied conflict management. We must return to the Thomas matrix. Consider the avoiding style. This is the quadrant of low assertiveness and low cooperativeness.
A leader typically utilizes the avoiding style because they fear negative personal repercussions, or because they operate under the false, dangerous assumption that remaining entirely neutral will allow complex behavioral friction to work itself out.
The text identifies this as a critical, fatal miscalculation of system dynamics.
The text documents the precise, unavoidable fallout of this inaction. It causes the escalation of a situation by allowing it to go unresolved.
An unaddressed error in the behavioral code does not spontaneously delete itself. It compounds.
By avoiding the conflict, the leader guarantees that the friction will intensify, spread, and eventually fracture the physical cohesion of the unit. The rot spreads throughout the entire architecture while the leader watches in silence.
Failure mode 3 addresses the danger of half-truths. For this clinical assessment, the manual integrates the doctrine laid out by General Lewis L. Wilson, Jr. in 1976 directly into Section 14D.
General Wilson's directive on operational honesty is absolute and uncompromising. He states, "Nothing is more disastrous than half-truths."
Let us analyze what a half-truth actually is in a mechanical system. It is intentionally corrupted data.
If a leader transmits corrupted data to their subordinates, or if they manipulate maintenance reports or readiness figures to make the metrics look acceptable on paper, they destroy the fundamental trust necessary for the unit to function.
They are intentionally poisoning the network to save themselves.
Furthermore, Wilson addresses the specific psychological profile of the leader who refuses to accept responsibility for systemic failures.
The text reads, "Nothing is more disgusting than the individual who can do no wrong and has an alibi for anything and everything that goes awry."
The alibi generator is a highly toxic component. If a leader constantly deflects blame outward, they broadcast a clear signal to their subordinates. Preserving personal status is more important than identifying and fixing operational errors.
The unit immediately learns this lesson and begins to hide its own mistakes rather than correcting them. The system becomes a facade.
This leads us to failure mode 4, tolerating incompetence. This is identified as the ultimate terminal failure of the system operator. It is the conscious refusal to enforce baseline standards.
General Wilson's doctrine provides the terminal procedure for this failure. The text reads, "Once people demonstrate laziness, disinterest, or an inability to do the job, you must have the courage to terminate their assignments. You cannot afford to do less."
You cannot afford to do less. We must analyze the weight of that statement. If you tolerate incompetence, if you knowingly allow a failing compromised component to remain within the operational machinery simply because you lack the personal courage to initiate the removal process, you become actively complicit in the failure of the unit.
By ignoring the failure, you adopt it. You compromise the primary mission of the United States Air Force to avoid an uncomfortable conversation.
The clinical reality presented by this handbook is that leadership is not about managing human feelings. It is exclusively about managing human performance and mitigating systemic risk.
The system requires constant, unyielding accountability. Accountability concentrates the unit's energy on creating a continuously learning and improving organization. Tolerating incompetence destroys that thermodynamic environment instantly.
Our diagnostic scan of the source material is complete. We have mapped the theories and tracked the failure modes.
We must now distill this immense clinical analysis into concrete, actionable directives that you, the operator, can execute immediately.
Directive 1. Diagnose the code. Tomorrow morning, you must objectively identify the developmental baselines of your airmen. Apply Maslow's matrix.
If you identify that your personnel are fixated on the safety level, if they are paralyzed by unpredictable schedules, job insecurity, or environmental threats within the shop, do not attempt to push them toward high-level innovation or self-actualization.
You are wasting energy. Fix the baseline operational environment immediately. Secure the foundation before you attempt to build the tower.
Directive 2. Calibrate your conflict style. You must honestly identify your default operational setting on the Thomas matrix.
If your natural psychological programming always defaults to accommodating, to avoid friction, you are an active vulnerability to the system.
You must actively construct a low-stakes scenario this week to physically practice collaborating, deploying high assertiveness alongside high cooperativeness. You must train the muscle memory to handle structural friction without yielding.
Directive 3. Audit your power. Assess your current utilization of the 5 points of power.
If you issue a command, and the only reason your subordinates comply is because of position power, the rank on your chest, your control system is profoundly fragile.
A single disruption to your positional authority will collapse your unit. You are mandated to cultivate knowledge and personal power immediately to establish systemic redundancy.
Go out onto the floor, identify a mechanical process you do not fully understand, and learn it to build your task power. Diversify your authority.
We leave you with a final, highly analytical query derived directly from the underlying logic of the text. Section 14D explicitly defines the purpose of accumulating power within this system.
It states, the sole advantage of power is the ability to do better.
This is a deeply provocative parameter. The text frames power not as a reward, but merely as a mechanical tool intended exclusively for the optimization of the system.
Therefore, what are the structural implications when a leader actively chooses not to acquire power? Is the conscious refusal to gather power and expand one's influence an act of personal humility?
Or, based on the rigid, uncompromising logic of the text, is the refusal to acquire the tools necessary to optimize the system actually a dereliction of duty?
The blueprint for the human machine has been provided. The required comprehension levels have been mapped and analyzed.
The catastrophic failure modes have been exposed. The execution of this programming is now solely your responsibility.
The human operator remains a highly volatile variable, but the system logic is absolute. Until the next diagnostic.